benefit the entire boating community. That's the goal, to benefit the entire boating community. So I am really grateful that Tripp decided that he would help with this program. And actually, he and I met back in the 80s when he was a baby kayaker. He had just started, and he refreshed me on some of the things that happened back then that I had forgotten. But it's been a long time since we first met. And since that time, Tripp has become an excellent whitewater kayaker, and he's also become a critical care nurse. And he also does ski patrol on the mountains, so he knows about the medical side of things. And clearly he has a lot of experience with backcountry skiing. And you're teaching avalanche trainings now too, right? Yeah. So Tripp is really all up in this project of sort of just transmitting the information about safety and how we can run better adventures in the great out of doors. And I'm grateful that he was interested in telling us about his thoughts.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Teresa. The only correction I would say is that we met in the 90s, not in the 80s.
Wasn't the 80s? God, you're young.
Yeah, that's
or I'm old.
Back. Yeah, right. So I'm really excited to be here, and thank you all who chose to join. I'll kind of go on with that theme, which is, so I live in Alaska now. I've been here for about 11 years, and my kind of relationship with, I asked this question of someone who wrote the Packraft Handbook, and I asked him, when did your relationship start with real consequences? And I think that's an interesting question for everyone to ask themselves. And for me, it was like with rock climbing, and I got super into it, a lot of solo rock climbing when I was in my late teens and into my 20s. And when I started paddling, quickly, I kind of, I'll tell a story about that in a second, but I quickly got into it and kind of immediately somehow decided that I needed to paddle harder whitewater. I've also, in between all of that, become a critical care nurse, and I've been a nurse for 20 plus years. I also hold a master's degree in anthropology and actually studied whitewater paddling as during my master's thesis between 1995 and 1997. And that's ultimately where I really learned to paddle harder whitewater. So with that being said, my relationship to environments that have consequence has been something that's been an ongoing thing pretty much since I've been in my early teens. So tonight's talk, let's start sharing the screen, shall we? Tonight's talk is going to try to walk you through some of the things that I think about when I am paddling, or when I'm in what I call, high risk or high stakes environments. And, nothing would be complete without first kind of like acknowledging that I think all of us have mentors and folks that have like super influenced us through time. And I think that's one of these awesome things about paddling, and that it feels like a smaller community than it is. This is Jim Snyder, kind of one of the fathers of sport booking. He wrote a book back in 1989. It was written a couple of variations on it since, but kind of the simple concept of chark in equals chark out is his idea, which is that we interact with the river and we put energy into how we connect with it. But like none of our machinations basically happen without the flow of the river. The power of the river exceeds anything we can do to it. So we need to work with the river, and we need to work in those environments. On this talk, it's really going to be kind of an exploration of why we paddle, which is ultimately what my whitewater thesis was about, and looking through it through like this idea that it is a high stakes environment. No matter what you do, there is hazard on the river, and there's a lot of uncertainty. And so we're going to talk a bit about how one deals with that uncertainty, and really what our relationship is with risks and rewards and the hazard that is out there. So the first thing I'd like you to do is reflect upon, why do you paddle? What necessarily are your life goals? What are some long-term goals, and what are your daily goals? And really, I'd ask people just to start shooting some things into the comments box on this one, which is like, take a second and really like reflect on like, what is it, like, why do I go out there? Might be a word might be a feeling, might be anything, but just take a moment and kind of reflect on that. And Teresa, I don't know if people start, shooting things into the comment box, feel free to just, kind of shout some out, whoever will, Teresa.
I will. And I just wanted to say that for questions in general, if you think of a great question while Trip is talking and type it into the chat box, I'll bring us back to it at some point. So reasons people are giving to go on the river: to unplug and be present. That's our club president. To experience nature, community, share time with friends, outdoors, being in nature, seeing things and places on a river that you can't see anywhere else. The mind space of lateral acceleration. Wow. To energize and connect with moving water, community, soul, mental health, strength, the water flow. Another one, another vote for being in places that people can't get to easily, haven't seen before. Yeah, so.
Great. Yeah, I mean, so kind of a variety of, topics there, and some overlap. So
stars.
Stars. Sorry, right. So shockingly, after almost a year of research in which I did 30 in-depth interviews with follow-up interviews, which equated to almost 90 hours of talking to folks and transcribing that, 136 days of paddling, 144 different paddlers. And I didn't have how many river sections that I did during that time, but this is the sum total, and for the first time ever presented in a public location. This is really just kind of was my idea of trying to code why people did it. Because at the time I did this research, basically land managers were saying, everyone's in a kayak, on a mountain bike, rock climbing, and they're just thrill seekers. That's all they're out there for. They just want the adrenaline. And that just didn't resonate, right? And so while this is in a circle, most of the time I describe this as being a graphic equalizer more, if those of you that actually remember what a physical graphic equalizer looks. And you turn up one channel or turn up another channel on a given day, and that if you have kind of what matches your expectations, then you'll have a satisfactory experience, to all the way up to an extraordinary experience. And so we each might have, and there may be some folks, I can think of one interviewee from back in the day who was like, I like to paddle hard things and be seen. That was it. He wanted to, just his ego, he wanted to be seen. And there's other folks that unless they're on an adventure or some type of ecotourism, they're just not happy. The local run has no thrill to them. And folks that just, any day on the water is good day on the water. And it doesn't matter. So for each of us, this is different, but it'll critically influence how we set our goals, and then how we interact with either ourselves or with our paddling partners and with the river ultimately. So paddling is ultimately a form of recreation. And this is me, just kind of my feelings on this. So they're only words, you don't have to really accept them. And that's kind of like a Jim Snyder quote as well, which is they're only words, don't let them get in the way. So I'm just providing perspective. And this is really, again, from kind of my master's thesis work, which is recreation is play. For some, it's also work. And also for many, it is deep play. That has ramifications for how we make decisions and how we look at the tasks that we're doing or the goals that we set. And so as we look at the slide, it kind of is fascinating to look at the verbs and the nouns that kind of describe the two different activities. And yet, as we're engaged in it, whether we're doing it solely for play or solely for work, I would generally offer that if you engage in paddling as deep play, you have to merge these two concepts, because it requires a lot of effort, labor, exertion, training to be truly proficient at doing the activity and to create safety in the environment that is so uncertain and so complex. So deep play, as I was going through, it was amazing how often the comment of what paddling was to them was, in the traditional anthropological or sociological paradigm, is that you should find like purpose in your life and meaning through work, religion, and family. But in the post like modern world or post-industrial world, many people have not found that to be true. And like we could go into a like kind of a deep kind of dive on recreation and play and the idea that rivers were first being used by indigenous peoples for transport, for hunting, for, you know, they were basically, they were at the arteries and veins of the world to both bring things and to take things away. And yet now, while they still are across the world such a big thing, really for some of us, they've become a huge, powerful place for us to go out and experience nature, to experience being with people, to challenge ourselves, to practice technical expertise, to create fitness, all those different kind of things that were on that last thing. And it's big business, you know, while the whitewater industry might not be big business, if you talk to anyone that's in it, the fact is that outdoor recreation accounts for nearly 2% of the US GDP. And then if you add in all the mass spectator sports and everything else, it's very hard to like see that, but it's, you know, we are deeply involved in play in the postmodern world and especially in the Western cultures. So I think why, you know, as we look at that, it kind of brings up this other idea to me, which is that paddling creates a special type of community. And in the sociologic world, it is communitas, is like kind of a very specific term. And it's this idea that we step out of our normal life and we step out of our normal existence. And when we do that, when we step out of our role, as say, as me as a nurse, or if I was a teacher, or if I, you know, provided daycare or dog care, or was a groomer, it doesn't matter what it is. When I step out, when I change into my paddling gear, I, like, in a sense, shed my other identity and I become a paddler and I become this. And so like paddlers respect each other for what they bring to the table when they're on the river for the most part. And so it's like, do I show up with the right gear? Do I show up with the right attitude? Do I show up with the right equipment, the right skills for whatever our task is at hand? Do I have communication skills? You know, all of these things will blend together to make me a valuable part of that group, or potentially a liability for that matter. But chances are we'll go out and have these deep experiences together. Then we get to the takeout. Maybe it's high fives and a beer. Maybe it's high fives and a seltzer these days, whatever it is. But you change back into your clothing and you reintegrate into the structure of life, and people go, what do you do today? And you're like, you wouldn't understand it anyway. Or you try to tell them and they just kind of look at you blankly. But for the core group that are paddlers, they're like, oh my God, that's so exciting. You went and did that. Was the water level good? What was it? Da, 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 da. And you just, you know, and it's like, it's the spark of conversation that, you know, can carry us through weeks or days, even when we can't get out and go paddling or be part of that. It's a tight knit community that kind of spans across the country and really across the globe for folks that have, you know, been at it for a while. So this is just kind of an amusing picture of me, and we were trying to this is an exploratory run with my good friend Kevin Colburn, and we were kept running into these log jams as we tried to go downstream. They were a hazard, but they weren't particularly dangerous at these lower water levels. But you know, it is an interesting thing, like would paddling or would being in the outdoors mean as much if there really were no risks? If, you know, like in an environment that's totally safe, do we really develop all of the different skills of truly caring about what we're doing? And I can't answer that, but it is kind of an interesting concept to ponder upon as you continue in the activity. So let's move on to risk, and just, you know, this comes straight out of a book that was kind of like a deep dive into what risk is. And so initially, like, you know, anything that happened outside of our understanding was an act of God, just faith. You know, there are all these myths from different cultures that like talk about how things they don't understand or disasters were just gods or the spirits or the, you know, it was just them doing things. As we moved into the more modern, you know, kind of thinking, the logical, the death of, and in some ways, spiritualness and magic, we started talking about it all as, oh, there's about probably a 20% chance that a hurricane's going to hit that coast on this given day. And we moved into probability and logic for the most part. We also moved into this concept of like, well, you know, if you don't risk something, you can't gain anything. And so during this era, it's like, we talked a lot more about risk as gambles, or like the possibility of a deep gain of some nature or loss. Yet, as we've moved into the postmodern world, and one of the previous talks, they talk about like the actuary approach to risk, and it is all focused on loss. There's like no discussion about the gain that can be made when you are in a position where there is quote unquote risk. Yet, I think that as we think about us engaged in this activity or anything, is that we really should realize that all of our decisions are mostly centered around what are we going to gain from this decision. We don't tend to sit around and postulate what are we going to lose that often. The goals that we set on a given day are so that we get the biggest gain, the biggest punch out of the day that we go paddling. We are looking for our optimal experience, our optimal gain for the moment that we have to go out on the water. That's what I truly believe. And I think that when we lose sight of that, then when we have to make high stakes decisions, we also can get ourselves in a lot of trouble. We know that we're going to get a big dopamine hit if we manage to run the rapid, do the river, put on the river, blah, blah, blah. Like there's something really cool at stake. And that's why we go out there and expose ourselves to all these hazards. So this is a very just like classic talk, take on hazard and danger. And it's just important to know that a hazard is only a potential source of harm. Danger may cause harm. And so therefore, in all of the risk literature, or if you talked about land managers, hazards therefore are dangers, and risk is the probability of encountering them and the possibility of loss to something you value. A log in a river is not a hazard if a human isn't on the river. It isn't a danger because we're not there. So this is all a human concept. Like the undercut itself is not a hazard unless you put something of value next to it. So we have to constantly tell ourselves this, which is that like these things just are. Like the river just is, the mountain just is. Like it doesn't matter. It's when we put something there in which then all of a sudden we put the potential for loss of something we value. It might be our life, it might be our partner's life, it might be equipment, but like otherwise all those things just exist. And so we also know what really tends to cause the most fatalities in whitewater. And this is no great, like there shouldn't be some kind of like at the end or when there's an incident or accident, you're like, oh, I never knew that could happen. So we're going to go through those top things that cause the most, challenges to folks or fatalities. One of my favorite quotes from Jim, it's just the river and the river doesn't care a fig about you or the yak you rode in on. So you must care. American Whitewater keeps an accident database, and you can go explore that on the American Whitewater site. You can pick from year to just all of it and go through. There's a lot of great lessons to be learned. Whitewater doesn't have anywhere near the kind of both, what would I call it? Very detailed examination of accidents and incidences that Whitewater has done. Like, because of like the National Forest Service like centers, like every accident mostly that occurs in the United States from an avalanche standpoint gets a detailed report written up about it by professionals. And so when you look at the accident database, there are a few individuals who have put in a tremendous amount of their life and time into like cataloging and writing up these accidents, but they are volunteers. We have no professionals that do this as like their job. So the information may not be as complete as you may wish it to be, but the fact is that this is like a lot of hard work that folks have put into this. So, so as we look at it, we like top of the list is cold water. And so we see, and this is not that every like 26% of all fatalities are caused by cold water, it's a contributing factor. So as you that are mathematicians or statisticians will quickly see this does not add up to 100%. So the next is flush drowning. And so we see like a river that doesn't have very many eddies or has very few structured eddies. It's just that it's going to be very hard to stop or get someone out of that river. High water. This is, clearly just a real magnitude of change above that last slide. And high water is associated with 23%. So right there in those three first slides, we can see that basically is like a huge contributing factor to the water. Obstacles in the river, hazards would, contribute for another 16. pretty sadly, but, lack of a life jacket. And we kind of, I am just laughing right now. And yet it happens. Like, here's this kid with whatever that is, a cutout thing that looks like a life jacket so he can put on the river and not get harassed by the river rangers. Why doesn't he have a life jacket? Don't know. But we see this and it's like, we read through, it's like, it is your first line of defense if you come out. Plus the fact that if you don't have a life jacket on and someone needs help, you really can't provide effective help. Single boat trips, in other words, solo boating, comes into play about 15% of the time. And, it's just something that, clearly when we'll keep talking about and defining some of these terms, but when you are by yourself, you are very exposed. Other objective hazards, undercuts and sieves, another 13%. So these are the top players. These are the hard hitters for us that are causing things. You can see, if you can kind of look at that graph, then the next two are hydraulics, both natural and dam. And so recirculating water that you can't get out of, finish off our list of things that are most likely to catch folks. So those are our hazard factors. And that brings us on to this whole concept of what are the components of river risk. And I have blatantly stolen this from the avalanche world. And so it works, it's a little challenged, but it just at least gets us all on the same page, that there is the probability and likelihood of being exposed to the hazard versus the consequences. And that increases. And so if we just follow this for a second, is that water level, your skill, the skill of the group, the fitness level of the group, your mental preparedness, your mental state, your fatigue, distractions, equipment choices, your knowledge of the riverbed, the water level, the topography, all of that, and just more or less foreign obstacles within it are going to increase the number of hazards that you have to kind of, it's going to increase your probability of interacting with that hazard. And so then the consequences are water level, again, either very high or sometimes very low. The topography that you're moving through, is it a gorged out section? Is it a lava tube? Is it, remote wilderness? Is it an urban environment? The weather, is it cold? Is it warm? Is it storming? Is there torrential rain? Is a hurricane coming? Is a hurricane just left, leaving, has high winds occurring? And then water temperature. They all increase the consequences of if you interact with that hazard. And so as that hazard goes up, or as all these things come together, the danger level of both the river or the moment can increase. There's not a lot we can do about the hazards. The hazards just are, much like we talked about. But our exposure, these two terms, exposure and vulnerability, we can choose what water level we go out on. We can choose which river we want to go. We can follow good travel habits. We can scout, we can sweep, we can do check-ins. We can decide that we're going to have, moments along the thing where it's like, hey, Teresa, how are you doing? Is things going all right? Yeah, it seemed like you were struggling. Why couldn't you keep up? Oh, I just saw you take a huge beat down and a pour over. Are you okay now? Are you fatigued? Do we need to do something? I mean, there are just any number you could have, like almost anytime someone, maybe even takes a flip in harder whitewater, you may be checking in with them, be like, hey, how you doing? Especially if someone takes a swim or, some type of an unexpected hold or beat in somewhere, may want to have a check-in. So those are the informal, but you might decide there are formal check-ins. Hey, we're going to stop at this rapid down the way and we're just going to, that'll be a break. We'll just take a break there and we're going to check in and see how everyone's doing in the group. Check-ins also occur to me, both at the put-in and takeout. And we'll talk about that more, but specifically at the check-in at the beginning of the trip. Hey, anything going on in anyone's life that I should know about? Any injuries, any stressors, anything happened on the way to the river? And how much are you out there? I mean, some people aren't happy unless they do like 15 laps on a river, sunrise to sunset kind of thing with a headlamp, but other folks are super happy with one lap. How tired how does that work for you physically? Vulnerability goes to our water level, all these equipment choices that we have. You're putting on in a remote wilderness trip with someone that's got 15 cracks in their boat and they're pretty proud of it. They're like, oh yeah, I've been making this boat work forever. Is it the one that's got a dry suit that's 19 seasons old and it's like, it's more of a sieve than it is anything else? Or, just you got the guy that's, gals showing up like, you're like, wow, every piece of that gear doesn't have a single scratch on it. That's pretty awesome. Like, did you just happen to have a really good Christmas, or what's going on there? You might ask. But and but we have all this kind of safety gear that's available to us, but what shape is it in, and is it functional? Do we have it? All this stuff comes up with our vulnerability. And then we can get into the vulnerability. You can decrease it by setting safety. But then comes like, are you setting the right safety? Do you have people in the right place? Do you have a group that's big enough to set appropriate safety? Do you have a group that's so big that you can barely set safety without, like, whatever, so these are all just variables, but these terms of exposure and vulnerability are things that we'll return to. Risk is another one that's interesting, because I really do believe that words matter. They kind of shape how we see the world, the anthropologist in me. And I think risk is interesting. When we use it as a noun, look at those things on the, that side of the screen. And when we use it as a verb, look on the other side. Pretty fascinating. They're like, totally like, really, is this the same term? But it is. And so here we are, we risk, hazard, menace, peril. And yet we want to go out and have adventure. We're willing to gamble on it. So I love this website, despair.com. If you've never gone through it before, you can find some just light humor in it, depending especially on your level of sarcasm. So this is a great time that we're just going to take a moment and stop. And I kind of want I want folks to, again, to take a moment and just identify for themselves what are examples for you of positive acceptable risk, and what are examples for you of negative and unacceptable risk. And again, just shoot some stuff of acceptable, unacceptable, for your own self out into the chat room. We'll read off some of those.
Unmute. Bumps and scrapes are expected. Capsizing, swimming. Unacceptable, injury with long-term consequences. Yes. Or death. Beyond the group's skill and safety rescue. In other words, the group is not prepared for the difficulty. Yes. Any other ideas? Acceptable, above 80% chance of success. And he's going to say, how do you define success? Ability of my fellow paddlers. Acceptable risks, edge of my skill level, safety is set, feel relatively confident in my abilities. Yeah.
And,
go ahead, Trip.
Oh, no, just waiting for that one.
Okay, there's more. Broken front teeth is acceptable over total elation. I'm not sure what you mean by that, Carrie. Real negative consequences, not acceptable. Running as a less experienced or less capable group, not acceptable. Not acceptable, putting anyone else at risk. Acceptable, you're putting yourself in danger, putting myself in danger. Yeah, because you get to choose.
Right. So this is kind of a great moment to kind of reflect back. So, when I got into paddling in 1995, I showed up into Western North Carolina during quote unquote a 50-year flood, which of course now with extreme events is probably like, every other week flood. But showed up, and my best friend Leland Davis had a boat, a paddle, and life jacket waiting for me, and a paddle trop or something like that. And so the first day finds us on the Big Ivy River up in the headwaters of the French Broad, and I put on and really been on a river 3 times in my life, and within about 150 yards I'm swum underneath a tree, and they've already got my boat out. I'm on shore, and there comes Teresa Grider. And I'm already walking back to the car. I think I'm seriously already have my boat on my shoulder, and I'm getting in from the, Eddie at the river is, you need to get off that river right now. You have no business being out here. And I think my response is, I think I'm already walking back to the car at this point. And so
I hope I wasn't that bad.
I think it was totally appropriate, actually. And it was a large group day. And so anyway, so, so cut to like the next day, found me for the next 3 days, found me on a class 4 run, basically micro creek, let me just tell you. And I am darn determined to get my roll. And so by I already knew how to roll in a lake. And so day 3, I finally had like a pretty rock solid roll. And day 5 finds me up on the Watauga River in Western North Carolina. I probably rolled about 30 or 40 times going down the Watauga, and then did not have a swim for, I think, the next 12 to 14 months, as I decided that, I was obsessed with this idea that, I needed to paddle more challenging whitewater, and that was the only thing out there in the world. And so that is exactly what I did. That was the goal I set, and for better or for worse, that was the direction that I had at 23 years old. And I would be very interested what I would tell my younger person now, and I don't know what lessons. I do know that made it through it, really made it through mostly injury free. But would it be something I would probably look at someone with very much a stink eye and very sideways in my life? But it is interesting what we do at very different times in our lives. So kind of brings us to like kind of the heart of some of this, like, what I kind of believe now. And that is that I have recognized, both from being in healthcare, being in paddling, and most recently, truly, like a lot of the thoughts have all sparked from being in the mountain environment and being in avalanches and being a bit newer to the avalanche. So I've been up here for 11 years. And in that time, I've taken like pretty much all the formal training that one can take in avalanche. I've been on a snow safety team for the last 10 years at ski patrol. We do mitigation. I teach avalanche courses. And I think to myself a lot about both skiing and mountain environments, but it's also made me think a lot about paddling. And I'm sure it's not because I've turned 50, tongue in cheek. But I think a lot about the pre-mortem. I think about these uncertain environments that we put ourselves in. And this is certainly not all my ideas. It's just a bit of a kind of a hodgepodge of what I've taken from different folks. I really do think that pre-planning is really our best and most critical element to keep us out of trouble. And so we have to know what our goals are. We have to grapple with what our risk tolerance is, because if we don't actually know what our risk tolerance is, we're probably just going to expose ourselves to a lot of hazards that we may or may not even be aware of. So there's no excuse not to know those slides that we first went through with the hazards. Like, you actually have to know you're putting yourself into a hazard before you can do anything to kind of change that. So there is some just like core knowledge that you develop. But in our planning, we have all this time to kind of think about things in a non-high stakes moment. And so it's like, I look at it normally as an exercise to think about the possible outcomes and will I be happy about it? Because like, I pretty much firmly believe that you have to become a self-expert at what motivates you, and understand the goals that you're setting. Each of us has to reflect on our relationship with hazards and dangerous situations and what we're willing to lose. We'll talk about tools and talk about mindsets that help. But without planning, I don't think you can accomplish any of them. And finally, I don't think you can accomplish this without learning to communicate in uncomfortable situations. Because if you can't communicate what you're feeling, and if you can't listen to what someone else is telling you, then you're really not being an effective member of a group, and you're not really doing service to yourself or to your partners. So how do you decide where you're going to go paddling on a given day? And so this next little bit's going to be, I think, information that folks are pretty familiar with. It's just, we're going to kind of rattle through it and just kind of make sure that we're all on kind of got the same pages. Simon here, we're up in like BFE Canada, and he's pointing at a book that says, "The road has washed out, Ed. What do you mean we're going to go and do this section of river?" And Ed is saying, no. I was just there last year. Some snow machiners have like piled brush, and we're going to scratch up the trucks, but we can get there. And so we did go to that river, and it was wonderful. And we were able to do it for about 2 years before the road did catastrophically wash out. But Simon is showing some good judgment here of really wondering how Ed has local knowledge to allow us to accomplish this goal and not end up stranded. deep in a canyon in Quebec. So I really think that plans are nothing, but planning is everything. And once again, another slide stolen from despair.com, in which this might ring well in your work environment or even your play environment sometimes. So planning a river trip. So the best way to affect an outcome of an event is through the beginning. Oh, Jim. So in today's modern world, basically, we have all these things that we used to not have. I should have taken a picture of the old gazetteers or paper maps, because I've spent a lot of time lost over my time paddling. But now it's like, we plug things in. And I think this is really actually kind of some of the point. Like, as we get going, like, I literally can just plug in where a put-in is or whatnot and go do a section of river. I can open up the American Whitewater database and I can see these rivers, and I had like nice and color coded. I can be like, oh, today I'm interested in paddling a class 4 plus, like kind of my favorite zone these days. But maybe, I want to dabble and see what kind of class 5 is. Oh, look, here this is, and here it is. Is it running? Oh, it's green, it's running, great. Don't need to ask, I don't need to look at a guidebook, don't need to do anything, because the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go down and be like, look at one of these like online gauges and be like, oh, the river's up and it says this, and I've got a water level now. And so I can get all this information. Probably if I was maybe a little bit younger, I'd be like, oh, let me go find this little point of view video scouting. And I can like, oh, this one at the bottom was 24 minutes long. If I really want to watch someone, watch 24 minutes of someone watching the L-dub, and, they'll go through every rapid. It's like, oh, there you go. There are the lines. And so all of this has been accomplished without me ever talking to a local. Like, I just can roll in someplace. Like, I need no local knowledge. I don't, it's just there. Which is pretty cool. But I started having to ask questions like, hey, has that river changed since that river description was written? Like, have there been any big floods? Have there been any big windstorms? What is happening on that river? Sometimes rivers change catastrophically, and they take years and years to come back to basically being runnable, or at least fun runnable. They can be full of hazards. And so taking time to talk to locals and and having someone who can help you navigate some of that can certainly decrease your uncertainty and certainly increase kind of your knowledge about what you're getting into and your partners into. You might not care. You might just want the adventure. That might be the metric on your graphic equalizer that you're pinning high that given day. So the other thing that is that even because the range might go from X to X on that graph, like, what is my optimum flow? And that's really helpful when you talk to someone that's kind of has the same goals that you do, or like the same skills, because what might be acceptable minimums, like the upper range might be like catastrophically high depending on your skill level or your desires, or the minimum might be like so low that it like exposes hazards that you don't want to be exposed to, or it's just like you hate hitting rocks. And so where is that optimum range, just like the graph says? And so those are things that, like, when you talk to folks that are from the local area and do a little bit more reaching out, you can find better answers to some of this. Going back to goals is that, I think very commonly, what the difficulty of a section of river is a huge contributor to what we decide to go paddle on any given day. And so I do think that that's one of both the interesting parts about Whitewater and not, is that there's no difference in class 5, class 3, class 4 between big water, creeking, like, just doesn't, no one makes a differentiation. The number is just a number. And so if you're most comfortable creeking, or if you've always grown like up, like paddling mostly on low volume kind of stuff, something that's a high volume class 3 plus might feel terrifying, or you might actually find that your skills really aren't up for that. Vice versa, you might always paddle like in, an area that's just water, and then you get yourself out on a class 3 or class 4 like creek run and find yourself sorely lacking in some of the critical skills that are necessary to navigate that waterway. So more stuff about local knowledge is just because something is rated something, that doesn't really give you any idea of how many hazards are in that particular riverbed. Sometimes, there's class 4 that's like pretty stinking clean, right? I think about the Wind River down where you guys are. And then I think about like the difference between how committing going into the farmland section is. I think about, going in on the hood, like the West Fork of the Hood, or going in on the Lower Hood, and like just, being in these different zones and just like what the objective hazards that are actually there on a given and how much that changes. But they're super different, but the numbers are just numbers. And so I don't know much about what the river is until I start like really digging into what is that riverbed structure, how frequently is it run, how often do people have data upon all these things. These are all like pieces of that puzzle that really vary whether I'm traveling or whether I know the local runs, like my backyard runs type of thing. So I'm always curious who else is going. Like, it's like some folks really like that thing on the left doesn't make anyone even flinch. They're just like, yeah, great, let's go. There's other folks that, they're looking for that middle, out there in the wilderness, like, not a soul to be seen. That's their jam. And my favorite is the picture on the right, which is, it's like a few of my really good friends up here and going out and, it's like your posse. And you have you know them all intimately from a lot of different settings. Like paddling is just one of the settings you know them from. So, but our friends, as that quote says, are really our most constant nudgers and can change our decisions. And so they become something that we when we're making decisions, we really have to start understanding both a lot about ourselves, a little about our relationship with them, and a bit about themselves as well. Because I think people really do matter. People are kind of they're you bring the right equipment, but their physical actions are your safety net, and they're also bring a lot of, at least for me personally, a lot of joy to what I do and make the moments just that much more magic when I'm out on the river. The idea of being prepared is a kind of an interesting and kind of critical thing, which is that, what are you getting prepared for and what are your skill sets? Because, we have our local runs and we have something where you might be on the water for less than 45 minutes on a local run. You might be doing what I'm doing in the parking lot here and preparing for a 3-day multi-day. That picture in the upper left with the pack rafts was a 4-day multi-day, which was a fly in and fly out, in which like the nearest anything is, roughly, 300 and some odd miles away. So if you need anything, you're going to be helicopter, out. Bottom thing there is where, bottom left is we're just about to put on the Romaine River up in very far Quebec, 6-day big water trip. So everything requires different skill sets, but the real take home is having the right gear for the right task at hand. And it also is important to be mentally prepared. So I would definitely caveat that in, which is that you're not just bringing the right gear, you're bringing the right mindset too, whichever your goals are for that moment. So like to pause again here and just see if there's any questions that have come in through the comments yet before we kind of.
No one else has any, but I have one.
Sure.
It actually relates to something I keep hearing about avalanche training, which is that there's an increase in accidents among people who have just been trained in avalanche prevention or avalanche safety in skiing. And so what do you think is the result of swiftwater rescue training in paddlers?
I haven't heard, what I have heard about what the first part of your comment is that I've heard that because so many folks are taking avalanche courses, we haven't seen a reduction in the accidents after people have taken. I don't know that it accelerates our accident rate, but that isn't interesting. As far as Swiftwater and Whitewater, I really don't have any. I've never seen anything that basically correlates the two.
I know. I have not seen it either.
Yeah. When I think about Swiftwater training, and it's a great segue into this next section, which is, we can do a lot of talking. If you don't know how to throw a throw rope and you don't know how to scout and you don't know where to put your safety, like all of this becomes words. Like we need to be deeply proficient in the skills that are necessary to provide safety on the river, and to either gain knowledge through books or classes, or probably most likely through our peers and mentors, about what are tools that work best on the river. What's a good throw rope for the region you're in? Because fact is that there are some like subtle variations between what safety gear you should be carrying in different areas and what safety techniques are going to work best in a big water setting as opposed to a creek setting, as opposed to probably being the two biggest. One thing that I would say here is, people have probably read that, is that there really is something to this fact that the only way to make change is to actually care about what you're doing. And so I think that's one way, is to that attitude, what does it matter? Fact is, it may matter. So care. Decision making. If decision making was like this, then it'd be pretty easy, right, to know that we have something ahead. But instead, probably much more similar to the left than it is to the right. This is where I'm just going to kind of like walk through just a few things. We've already touched on some stuff, but just like, how do I make decisions? I mean, ultimately, again, it's getting close to 30 years. I still paddle a lot of class 4-5, some class 5, do a lot of expedition paddling, still up here, spend anywhere from a couple weeks to a month out doing sea kayaking trips, kind of in Alaska. So get a fair bit of time out remote. My first and foremost is exactly what we were going through, is that the planning. Like I should have had a slide about pulling topographic maps and pulling, knowing where I'm going and having the resource. In today's phone world, I use an app called Gaia GPS. And Gaia allows you to download maps onto your phone. Like there's first and foremost on a river, I don't care where I am, I make sure that I have like something on my phone of a map in case I have to walk out. If I need to get help, if I need to go someplace, I want to have a stinking map with me so that I can navigate out of that canyon, out of that area successfully to the nearest place. I don't need to be wandering around lost. And so I'm sorry I failed to put that in the planning section, but that is it, just geographically knowing where you are. And that's the same if you're planning an expedition. Spend a lot more time figuring out where you're going and what you're doing, so that when you're in there, that's not a question mark and you're not having that trouble. I talked to quite a few friends that as I was prepping for this thing, and like overwhelmingly from my group and from some folks, depending, it didn't matter on their skill level, is that water level was probably the number one condition that they were paying attention to. And so each person has their comfort level as we went, but what are the conditions? And so it's like, I have, I'm sure everyone has their own temperature cutoff, but I also am not a huge fan of paddling under 32 degrees or below freezing. People have variations. I've certainly done it over the years, but what are the conditions? And so that's weather, things moving in, but water levels, what I'm primarily after there. What are my goals for the day? And this is back to that graphic equalizer. There's nothing more I can really say at it, but what I would really like offer to you is, I think you could sometimes substitute that as, what are the rewards you're looking for? Like what's making you excited? What's like, what in the pre-mortem is giving you that warm, fuzzy pre-glow of going out there and doing it? Sometimes it's just being with people. Sometimes it's the exercise, the beauty, all of those different things, a brand new boat that you want to go play with. You just want the feeling of surfing, whatever it is, there is a reward, and being able to identify what that warm fuzzy you think you're going to get out of going to expose yourself is just kind of important to kind of hold right here.
Hey, Trip.
Yeah.
There's a comment in here that fits right in. He says, local knowledge is also the best when you have to escape, leave safely. Mm-hmm. Like knowing where the trail is. I mean, you can look at the topography, but knowing where the trail is, the locals can tell you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I want to identify if this is a high frequency event, and we're going to go through, I'm going to define some of these terms here coming up, but I want to decide if it's a high frequency event. And what I mean by that is this something I do all the time? Is this like right in my, like, you know, is this in my, what do they call it? You know, comfort zone. It's something I do constantly. Like if I'm a creek boater, am I going creek boating, or am I going to go run big water? I ask myself if this is a high risk event. Is this something that's sort of like, I feel like it's a high, you know, for me, it's going to be high water or more water than I'm like maybe potentially comfort, or like a step up in the paddling level. Like, you know, is it a grade higher than what I'm super comfortable with? Or is it super remote? But is there some element to what we're doing that is just makes it, to me personally, feel like a high risk event? So I can decide if it's something out of the ordinary. Should it be something that's putting me a little bit on high alert? You know, DEFCON 2, maybe DEFCON 4, depending on how much it's out of my normal. So I may identify potential concerns with the group ahead of time, you know, and this is just me thinking. I'm just, you know, knowing them, like, is this something that's going to require a 7-mile hike in, and we're going with someone who's like, you know, you're hard pressed to get him to normally hike 100 yards, but he says he wants to join the group. Are you flying into some place that then requires a 10-mile walk down to the river, again, with that same person? Like, is there anything, I mean, these are extreme examples, but like, is there anything that I'm starting to identify that are throwing off little red flags for me? How am I feeling physically, emotionally, and mentally? That's like a constant check-in before I go at the put in, sometimes at the takeout. And then just telling myself that I'm going into a complex place. I'm going into the mountains. I'm going into the river, where the river doesn't care me or a fig about the yak I rode into. I sometimes use this guy, Bruce Tremper, who's a big avalanche thing. He wrote an article which includes this concept of city think and mountain think. And city think is sort of, you know, this idea that we're just kind of going through the world, and in general, you know, like we have law enforcement and we have rules of society and we have rules of engagement with other people, and that for the most part, it reduces our like adverse interactions with both people. And that when we stop at a stoplight, we believe someone's going to stop. When we stop at, you know, when we stop at a stop sign or a yield sign, we just expect everyone's going to do the same thing. So when I'm in the mountains, I don't expect anything to go any particular way. There's no rules per se. I'm in a very complex environment, in an uncertain environment. So I'll ask myself whether, you know, I keep going back to this personal work operational, because it really frames, I think, sometimes how, if I'm guiding a trip or whether I'm just on my own personal trip, may really influence how I'm approaching problems. May not be that dramatic, but at the same point, it probably is influencing my goals and influencing my risk tolerance, if I feel like I'm in a guide-esque role. I shape my mindset in a sense, and this is from a book called Stumbling Toward Happiness. And, you know, there's so many philosophers that have written something similar, whether it's, you know, the chariot driver and the horses or whatever, but it's just that our rational mind is small and our autonomic, or our, you know, kind of other part of our brain is big. Our, you know, what the part of us that is after those rewards is much bigger than what our conscious mind can control. And so all I can really do is shape the path and plan to help kind of rein in my desires, as it were, my appetites. And so I have to do a lot of this ahead. I have to keep trying to put little pieces in place for myself so that I won't get myself a little bit out of control. Mostly I want to go to cognitive ease. That's where I want to be. I want to be smiling and happy on a sunny day. Like, this is at the end of like the Romaine River, 5-6 days. I love boofing off small ledges. That's like the only one creaky move. Everything else was big water that scared the living snot out of me on that river. I ended up like 8 feet deep. And this is one of those ones where I couldn't find a big creek boat. And I thought, oh, well, I have a medium burn, and yeah, 5 days of gear, that's fine. And when I was 8 feet deep in a seam, halfway through a big water rapid, acting like a squirt boat, I thought to myself, oh my God, this is the wrong boat for this river. And that happened more than once on this. It was just the wrong boat for that river. And I learned something on that trip. Make sure you have a boat that's not 72 gallons when you're 6'4" and weigh 180 pounds and have 5 days of gear. So thankfully, I have spent a lot of time underwater over the years. So I'm looking at these rewards versus potential loss. You know, I'm looking for the reward. I'm concerned about the potential loss, but I'm looking for the reward. And so um, the section of river I choose, I then critically think about where are the potentials for loss on that river? How hazardous, how many hazards are on there, and am I willing to expose myself to them? Because this is like probably the most single helpful thing that I have read in the last decade. Kahneman's book on thinking fast and slow. And there's a lot of folks that have taken this many different ways. And for me, my personal take is that our system one is like, it's how we survive in the world. It's how we just get along. It's how we get from work. When we get in our car, it's what gets us to work. It's like, we just know all the rules of the road. We go, it's great. Like for the most part, like, you know, I can navigate a 4-lane highway, not that we have one in Alaska, but, you know, doing 70 miles an hour. And my system too has to take over sometimes, like, because I find myself, and this is like, you know, this is a total human factor here, is that we have ice on the road 6 months out of the year. And I will find myself doing 70 on that icy road on my way to work, because I do 70 on my road on the way to work. And so it's a blizzard out there and I'm in my Tacoma truck and I'm just hucking along at 70 and it's icy and it's blowing snow and you can barely see anything. I'd be like, slow down, Trip, slow down. You got to slow down. And, you know, I have to engage my system too to get me to slow down. My other example on that really quickly is this idea that, like, you know, most of the time you're going and like, there's really no reason to like think about much else. But like in Alaska has really taught me to think through the experience of mentors and other folks, is this idea of being more prepared than I think I should be on a road trip, because I may start a drive going someplace and there's only one road going and normally one lane. There pretty much, once you leave the town of Anchorage, there are like these 30 to 50 mile stretches that if there's an accident coming in or out of town, that's it, you're shut off from town. You cannot get here. There is no secondary road to get around to get here. And if you get stuck there and it's like -10, you dang well better have a sleeping bag and have some water and have some food. I carry an extra, you know, puffy jacket, puffy pants, and boots when I'm there in case someone has an accident or something happens. So I'm not like my friend's dad, who's a surgeon, who's walking down the road in a pair of dress shoes at -30 in his dress khakis and almost gets frostbite so bad he has to do something with his feet back in the 80s. These are just like lessons you learn from folks, because there may not be someone to help you. So anyway, this is Boyce Greer, who sadly left us on the river, died. And, you know, he taught me a ton, and he's certainly had a lot of mastery and confidence in his paddling. And I think that there's a real danger in becoming an expert. And it's something, again, that you have to like kind of like actively work against, as it were. And so you might gain all those things on the left. And the, you know, the middle, you could take some of those things, but that self-conviction and faith have some pretty dark, you know, shadowy land that you can go into on those two. It's great to have self-conviction. It easily can go to hubris. You can have faith, but that can easily turn into kind of irrational decision making, that it's going to work out like the last time it worked out. Great to have self-reliance, but you do need to know when to ask for help. It's great to be nerve and poised, but it's also good to just totally recognize, to be like, oh God, I really am super nervous. Like, you know, like this is causing me a lot of anxiety, and to voice those concerns, because we all have those emotions. And so it's a struggle, you know, it really is a struggle to be very proficient, and yet to make sure that when you're in a group, you're communicating effectively and you don't fall into some of the traps that the very things that are the strongest parts of your personality and all the experience you gain can also be your weakest Achilles heel. And then, you know, this uncertainty, this variability, doubt, you'll just keep hearing me talk about it. It's just asking questions, like cultivating doubt is just, you know, I think critical when you're in the mountain environment. It's just keep being, oh, it's all going to work out. Hell no, it's not going to work out. I'm not happy until I am off the river half the time. Like, I'll smile a lot in the river, but you also see me look pretty kind of unimpressed in certain moments. And I'm unimpressed when anything is not going the way that I like, kind of like what our plan said it should go. When I start getting thrown curveballs that, you know, either have us behind a time schedule or, you know, it's just something we were totally not expecting. that's because we're in a wicked environment. And this is really a key element of all of this, is that, you can kind of look this up and figure out some more ways of kind of, if you feel like delving into this, because that's the whole point of this talk, is to expose you to ideas. But like in kind learning environments, you get this really direct feedback. You can make accurate judgments. You get to develop an intuitive judgments that are like truly like based on something that is, you'll be able to repeat. Whereas in a wicked environment, like you might draw a lesson from something, but like the variables are so complex and they're so changeable that, like in this canyon that we're heading into in the Wrangell Mountains in Alaska, it was a class 3-4 run. The cliff walls extended up 300 to 400 feet above us. There were rocks zinging down for about 8 miles going through the canyon as the sun was hitting like kind of the frost. It was like late, fall, but temperatures were 20s at night. And so in September, so as those rocks defrosted from the upper parts, we were just having rockfall for almost 8 miles. We were paddling underneath the rock walls, the undercut rock walls, to try to keep away from the rocks. And you'd go for a while and be fine. And then all of a sudden you hear this, and something would splash a few feet away from you. And you'd just be like, ah! And it's like, did I need to expose myself to that amount of hazard? The answer was no. But I had 8 miles of this canyon to get out of, plus like the paddle in and out. So it was not something, it was like, just wasn't in my thing. It was an experience that was outside of anything I'd seen before. And so I didn't even know to ask that question. It was something that just caught me completely by surprise and made me very unhappy. So anyway, if there had been no rockfall, if there had been, and my point on this is that, if it had been a sunny day and temperatures had been above freezing the whole time, I don't think we would have had the volume of rockfall. And so you would have gone through that canyon, never come away with this kind of concept that, oh, there could be rockfall. And that's something I should be concerned about in this river. Just would have been like, oh, it's great. The water's easy. Like, saw very few rapids. So this matrix refers directly back to this guy, Gordon Graham, does a really nice talk on high risk, low frequency events. It's easily found by Googling it. Worth taking a thing. It's a 15-minute video. I was going to show it, but I'm already at 15 minutes, and clearly a good idea that we didn't. But he talks about high frequency events. And in the high frequency events, the next slide is going to talk about when we do them, we very rarely have time for things that we do all the time. We get the skills, we have the equipment, we're good at the things we do all the time. And so normally it takes kind of a failure on our part or some other variable to make things go wrong, both even if there's a high risk, we just do them well. Same thing with the low risk. We get ourselves in more trouble on the other time is like things that we just never see. The canyon, with rocks falling. I don't know what I could do about it. If you live in Portland, Oregon and never leave the city and never deal with snow, a high risk, low frequency event would be driving through a blizzard on an icy road in Alaska on your way to work at 70 miles an hour. That might not work out very well for you. And if you were stuck, if the car would only go 50, that might be a non-discretionary timing thing. If the cruise control set and you just have to drive at 70, you're not going to have much time to think. You just have to do the action. Whereas, anyway, maybe not the greatest example, but fact is that our discretionary time is the time that we have to learn about, to train to do it. So if I knew I was going to drive on an icy road, I might go practice sliding my car in an icy parking lot. I might drive at 35 miles on an empty road and learn how to fishtail and learn how to control my car in an icy environment. I would have gained those skills and then I could apply them to a higher risk environment. But I could build in, I can make little steps and get there. That's mostly what we do paddling, right? You paddle class 3. You do like little boof moves that have no consequence. Then you go paddle class 4 and you run off a 4-foot drop. And you learn to do a boof until maybe if that's your desire and goal is to run off a bigger waterfall, you've already gained that skill. When you go to make that boof stroke, you know you're going to make that boof stroke. You've practiced that skill to the point that it is second nature for you. So skill acquisition and training for events that don't occur very often. And in the low risk, low frequency, they just don't happen very often. So hopefully, and they're low risk. So the consequences of loss are very low. So on those high frequency events, this is what he identifies as being our problems: complacency, fatigue, distraction, hubris, and risk homeostasis. And these are all things that are like, when we look at when we're in high stakes decision making, are all things that are like extremely problematic for us. If we're complacent, we may miss the moment when we can make change. If we're tired, same thing. If we're just, we may not be able to react in a way that's meaningful. If we're distracted, how to, God, I have a great video. If you're another one, if you have a few minutes, is watch The Monkey Business Illusion. And it's called The Monkey Business Illusion. Simons has a great book, and it's just, our mind only holds so many, can only pay attention to so many variables at one time. And if we're distracted, we may be missing the most critical element that we should be. This hubris, like the difference between self-confidence and hubris might be a fine line in moments. Like, I got this, like I do this all the time. In healthcare world, I see this when it's like, stop. Like, normally when you go into a high stakes thing, the only thing that can really help you is to stop, take time, get your situational awareness going, and really make sure that what you're seeing is what's really happening. Make sure that what looks like is happening is actually what's truly happening. If you just bum rush in and be like, I got this, you just might be the bull in the china shop and just make matters completely worse. Same thing, I think, why is everyone eddied out? Here'd be a great example in paddling. You're on a river, the group ahead of you is all eddied out, and you just decide you're going to blaze straight through that rapid because you know it, right? And then come to find out they have a boat pinned downstream. There's a log in the rapid of the normal line. Insert blank. The rapid's changed in between the last time you were, but there you are. You're just going to blindly go off that drop because this is your local home run. Been there. Boofed straight onto that log. So risk homeostasis is, this idea that, we keep doing the same thing over and over, and it is a very hazardous situation. Me driving on the road at 70 miles an hour, that is risk homeostasis to a T. And that I need to rein that back in. I need to recognize that the conditions have changed, and that, doesn't matter that I have good snow tires on and everything else. I just need to slow down. Like, nothing's going to help me if I start sliding. And so I need to modify my behavior. I need to understand that the safety measures that are in place aren't going to change the outcome if something starts happening that's bad. Doesn't matter if you have a dry suit. Doesn't matter if you have all the throwbacks. Doesn't matter if your whole team does. Like, if the water, fact is if you're paddling at 25 degrees out and the water is freezing cold and ice melt, like, that's a lot of exposure, and that you should rein in your decisions. Make sure that you're, doing the right thing. Don't skip scouting a rapid because you don't want to get cold. These shortcuts that we get ourselves in trouble. So scouting a rapid on the Remain, this is our discretionary time to think about it and talk about this. And on the right-hand side is my buddy Ed dropping into that big hole, and we've found that little, if you see that little black spot, that's the weakness in it. And everyone ran that line. And so once you're in that, it's like the talk that you guys gave, you're locked in, you're committed, you do what you need to do. This is not the time you want to be second guessing. We decided that was the line, and it was. And people paddled the line and had great goes at it, but there was a lot of hazard to either side of that line. And so we took our time, we used our discretionary time to really look at the problem and then successfully navigate it. This is, another opportunity just for folks to throw out. It's just like before we kind of move into the last few, handful of minutes of the presentation, but is, people throw out ideas of when you've encountered something or moments where you think there's time to think it through as opposed to no time to think it through. And this is my buddy Ed on a small creek, our local run in Vermont, taking out a log that is clearly blocking the only viable path down the stream. And that thing had been there for quite a while. So.
Tactical patience, application of tactical patience to address the problem. Interesting.
Yeah.
Time to think it through while scouting.
Yeah.
Yeah, no time when you're already in the drop and committed. Mhm. Kind of the same things apply when you're driving. Like the best time to look at the map is not while you're driving.
Right.
Let's see. The boat is pinned, but we are all safe on shore. That's when you have time to think. Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
precisely it. Before you put someone in that water.
Right. Boat extraction. But a pinned paddler, less time to think, or no time,
No
depending.
time. I would agree. I mean, if you have a paddler that's either underwater or in danger, you pretty strongly moved into your no discretionary time.
Right.
You know, that position can go unstable so rapidly that you need to start moving towards without putting anyone else hopefully at risk. It's a much longer conversation than that. So
Yeah. And then there's one more. It's the order of the paddlers in the group. You have time to think about that.
yeah, which is that paddling order can certainly can have a lot. I'd add one, and I was kind of hoping someone would throw it out there, is this: before you even put on the river is
Yeah.
discretionary time. And kind of said that up top, but it's like, our decision to put on is, and where we put on is, there should be discretionary time. And if you're feeling there's no discretionary time on that, that might be in the avalanche world, they call it, yeah, it might really be, we call them red flags, I guess, in the avalanche world. But I think that same kind of concept, it's, is very true. So kind of in wrap. Oh, go ahead.
In training exercises, lapping rapids, that gives you time to think.
Yeah. And you get direct feedback. I think one of the other presentations talked about, videoing yourself running the same rapid over and over again. And especially if you had video of like running it over the years, how much your skill changes, or, sometimes you can see things that you're doing that otherwise you're not self-aware. It's when you're in rapids, it's hard to be as aware of your body position and what you're doing. But when you see that video,
great idea. I wish I had that.
Yeah. So, this is kind of, we're really getting into the wrap up here, and it's like, Annie Duke, another great book, probably pretty close behind the Kahneman book as far as books that I've enjoyed reading about just how our mindset is. And that's, in chess, if you're good at it, which I'm not, it's apparently, it's all about skills, precision, and logic, and the information is there. Like basically the moves are there, you can see it. And if you're a grandmaster, you know what different things will do without, there's no luck to it per se. Whereas in poker, it's like you're dealt cards. And like, Teresa and I were talking about this. It's like, if you go on a river and you're holding 4 aces and you think that's it, that's the strongest hand, and then the river plays the royal flush. I mean, it's like we can be as prepared as we want. We can have the best crew we want. We can pick the perfect level. And it's like we can be the most fit. I mean, those are like the 4 aces, right? And yet, who's to say the royal flush isn't going to get played? And I mean, am I really willing to bet my life on it? Am I willing to bet my friend's life on it? And it's like, I'm really am willing to paddle some very challenging whitewater, but boy, I want to be very, very cautious. I want to keep looking for not just putting on the river, but all the way is this kind of cultivating my doubt, my uncertainty, listening to my body, watching, checking in on myself, checking in on my paddling partners, checking in our gear, changes in conditions, and all of that. So, because, these high stake decisions, it's like, this is the easiest. It's like the existence of a possible large loss. And so we're kind of like, we're starting to wrap back towards our goals. If your position in your social group is all you consider to be an emotional large loss, that's a great moment to start reflecting on your goals. Because, I think your older you or your different you would realize that you're still the same person, much like what the quote from Alex Honnold that was bantered last year, which is, whether you succeed or whether you fail, you're still the same person. And in his example, it's whether you live or die. But the fact is whether you run something or don't run something, you are the same person at the end of the day. And so, and that rapid's going to be there, or that river's going to be there. And it's just interesting. You could spend an entire presentation or an entire course, like college, talking about some of this stuff. But it's like looking at the existence and like, what do you think? My 23-year-old person thought that like there was a lot of loss if I had to be on every river that ran when it ran. Like I felt this acute emotional like loss if I wasn't present when something ran. Like, and I needed to be the most challenging thing around. Those days now, I'm happy to get out with like good friends and get on the water, and like I call that a huge win. And so, and I still like running challenging stuff. I still love going to I'm not done with adventure. I just want it to be, I don't want these large losses, either physical or emotional. And can you reverse your decision? This is the background picture. This is the Romaine River. And once we put on, we were five days down. Didn't matter that I was in a boat that was 72 gallons with 5 days of gear, my 185-pound butt. Down we went through those rapids. And so, I was not getting back. That was not a reversible decision for me. I walked some extra stuff because of it. That one actually, right there, I walked in that kind of just below the word decisions. And everyone ran it, said it was the greatest rapid, big slide that ended. And then the next trip that went down, someone ran that slide, swam, lost their boat, and had to swim out, like basically swim on the back of someone's boat for the next day and a half, walk, swim, walk, swim, walk, swim. And so they ran the construction crews and get helicoptered out. So these have we've covered, and it's just, this is my slide of, these are the mental, emotional, and physical factors that I check in. When it's the perfect flow, sometimes I actually am like, ooh, I should just think about this. Like when I start thinking that, because is that inside emotional, is my elephant getting reared up, going, I want to go do this. So I think about that if I'm, and then these other ones we've talked about. And so I'm going to kind of move on. I do think that thinking about thinking helps us make better decisions. This is a picture of my buddy Jeremy paddling a waterfall. About maybe a minute before this, we had been pack rafting as a remote run that was the first descent in Alaska. And I was like, so you're just going to boof off the right side? And Jeremy goes, what's a boof? And Jeremy's an extremely accomplished athlete. And I just never even thought to ask that. We'd always paddled big water, never creeked together. So one of those great moments. So choose groups with common goals really does help probably in mitigating your moments of high stake group decision making sometimes. Where am I going? Groups understanding the goals, following the leader's direction, but not blindly, because when someone does have expertise, but voicing your concerns and your emotions, that open communication. Really, a predetermined criteria for changing goals is pretty awesome. Is that achievable? Not 100% sure. There's always it's 2 inches higher than we said we were going to put on. You still want to put on? It's tough. It's a tough, where that line truly is. But it is kind of nice if that as a group you have some ideas. Training and experience. I can't go back enough. As if you don't have the skills, you can have all these other things, but you really need the technical skills, and to put into depending what your goals are for paddling, just a lot of time doing stuff, and ideally it's doing it correctly too. We talk about this. You can't just go out and paddle all the time. You should actually be working. Teresa said something interesting. Just every time, back to the very first slide, and your charging angle, do the move that you actually think you're gonna do. Pick going from point A to point B, make that arc, get that eddy, go through where you want. And when you don't go through the way that you, in your mind, in your line, ask yourself, why didn't I? Because on class 2, class 3, it's what makes class 2, 3 so exciting for me and so fun, and why that's a great time, is that I'm gonna go do that. And then if I can't make my boat go do that, I ask why. Why can't I make the move the way that I think I should be able to make the boat move? Why is it me? Is it the boat? Is it the river? but like, it's great to try to figure out how can you make a boat do precisely what you want it to do. To me, it's probably one of the biggest things that keeps me out there, that feeling of fluidity of like going places with a boat and just being on the river and working with the river. I'm not working against the river. I'm letting the river do the work. Sometimes I work against it, but for the most part, like, what can I use that water to transport me to where? And most of the time it's to a really wonderful place. That's why, still love river running. So, but the enemy is us. And, this is a kind of a quick run, like, as we like, we're at, it's like, again, those perfect levels, the day that, and I added some of those facet kind of things. This is an afterthought on this, but, scarcity and tracks on this perfect. The first to be able to go with both the river, the location, the partner, whatever your goal is, these are all goals. Paddling with the same crew is awesome and your core crew, but you might run into Schubert-sync, complacence, acceptance, commitment, because you want to be part of that group. And so you're going to get on that team river no matter what. And you accept the fact that we're going to run something harder, or that you're accepting, oh yeah, we run this normally at this low, but we're going to run it the next low. All right. Paddling those local runs higher than, that creep until you finally scare yourself. And hopefully you don't have a bad outcome. The effects of experience and training are awesome. You go for that Swiftwater course, you go and do all these things, but, does that lead like back to that over self-confidence, the hubris, the, kind of the dark side of all of the good things? Well equipped, but oh, I've got a dry suit, doesn't matter if I swim. But does the river really care? Nah, doesn't care. You might be dry, but it's still just as powerful and whatnot. You might have the best throw up in the world, but whatever. Anyway, just that's the idea. The only thing running that day, I think that one comes up a lot. It's the only place your friends are going. So do you just follow along, even though it's not really what you're quite after on the day? The illusion of safety of your local run. There's, this local run keeps coming in a lot, because just like I think accidents often occur within 3 miles of your house, I do think a lot of like accidents, incidences occur also within your local zone. When you're traveling, or like you decide you're going to drive up to the Olympic Peninsula or down to Medford, I spent a lot of time, money, effort to get to. It's my only week. It's my week off. Like, down at the Illinois, I'm down at the Smith. God, it's a little higher, a little lower. But I'm going to go anyway because it's my week off is when I chose I was going to do it. The time constraints, we're all under time constraints in this world. And we get cold, hungry, tired, exhausted, scared, bored for that matter. Like, you're on a trip and you're just like, oh God, I got to get off here. Like, I'm so tired of like scouting all these rapids with different people. Like, just, can't we just move along? Let me rush the group. So then you start becoming a nudger. But, we combat that with these, communication things. And I'm not going to spend much time on this one at all, but this is the crew resource model. It was something that was implemented in the 90s for OR teams. Clear, concise, timely, relevant, acknowledge. So you get feedback, because that's the big thing. So when you communicate, someone should be like, I hear you. But I like this one a lot better. This has kind of come over in the last few years, but it's a lot simpler. You state a concern, you tell someone why you're uncomfortable. And then, so the first thing is to state a concern, and maybe that changes the behavior. Hey, I'm a little concerned about blah, 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 blah. Someone's like, I'm still going to go. And then you're like, I'm really uncomfortable with you running that rapid today. Like, I don't think that you're paddling that well, whatever it is. And finally, they're like, no, I'm going to run it. And like, no, I really think it's a real safety issue. Do you not see the log that's sitting in the middle of that slot? Like, you're not listening to us as we're scouting. There is a log right there. Like, you're going to paddle into it. It's and that last one is supposed to be like kind of like a moment of stop. Like, you've now escalated this conversation to a high stakes conversation. The moment you start talking about this safety issue, and it's 3 steps, and like, this is a trainable. This is not just something like you can just go out and be like, I'm concerned, I feel like we're being unsafe. This is something you have to agree to do with your paddling partners, so that when they hear those key words, they actually pause. They're like, huh, Teresa just said she was concerned, ooh, now she's uncomfortable. And now she's telling me that there's a safety issue. Like, I should be listening, like, I should be ears on. So maybe, it sounds hokey, but like, in the hospital where like, like we use this not frequently at all. And it's extremely effective when something, like we're moving towards, like you bring something up to someone and they're like, yeah. And you're like, no, you don't get it. Like, I'm really uncomfortable. Like, and whatever. I think the patient's unsafe. So this one is another great book. I found this book quite a few years ago when I was actually training nurses and in critical care. And probably my favorite book on communication ever. And I think that well worth a read. So in my top 3 books on this thing, but like amazing book. And it's the reason it's amazing is because it really gets to, it's a negotiator writing this, and it gets to this idea of like, we're always trying to preserve relationships. And like, that is the goal of communication, is to preserve relationships, unless we're in a work environment, in which case we can sometimes dictate to people what we want them to do. But, I just have a super simple example, like, you go to paddle the East Fork, but, it's still raining, the water's rising rapidly. You're just like, I'm just comfortable, I think it would be better if we went and paddled the Lower Hood. We're in we brought our half slices. We didn't bring creek boats, and the Lower Hood is going to be a great play level, and we'll get to go surfing, and the surfing's really good. And it's like, you never have to say a hard no. You're basically just pointing out what it is. And, if that's not successful, then of course you could move back up to, the slide before. But the idea is that you find a way to preserve relationships and don't end up feeling like that heart pumping conversation, because that's not what you want. You want a conversation that feels kind of easy, like where you're acknowledging both your goals or your team's goals, telling them like why maybe this isn't really the best decision right now, and offering something else that is a way to, move forward. It isn't just a hard, like, no way am I putting on that. You're not breaking your relationships. You're looking for an active go through, and it may be the beginning of a longer conversation, but by far my favorite book on negotiation and communication. So debriefing at the end of every day, I think, has some value. It can be super kind of informal, but I mean, these questions are just kind of classic questions of just, did we actually do what we said we did? Were there any good decisions? But most, and very importantly, are there any great decisions? We make good decisions all the time. We make mostly good decisions. We mostly meet our goals. Do we do anything, did we do anything not great on the river? We did some things really wonderful, like, just identifying those times when you're like, man, that throw rip you set was perfect. That eddy you chose behind that rock really put you in the best position to help, if something happened. And sometimes, it's like, how much time do we actually spend haranguing about water levels? I know if you're like me, like, I don't know, like, I think that one's going to be running. It's done. So you get there and it's like, was it at 6 inches? So it's great to reflect on that, like this gauge, that gauge, all that stuff that's on gauge. It's like, yeah, that's cool. And do we have any target questions? Like, did that river change over the course of the winter? Did that river change with the last flood? Did it change with the last windstorm? Is there anything that we need to, is there any lessons that we learned about that river or that trip? Or is there anything we need to share with others? There's a log now blocking X slot. There's a log in here. This is unrunnable. Oh, that log's gone. You can now run so-and-so. Just, do we need to share that information with anyone in our community? So,
and wouldn't it be great if that information got shared on the AW page where we could all look it up?
That's right. We're really at the end of the presentation. Thanks for, having me talk and for spending time and really listening to me go on. I really can't tell you how passionate I am about this. And I mean, it's funny, like, I always think talks like this are going to be easy. And I always find I put a tremendous amount of time into them. And it's because I think that the fact that you're sitting like in the audience and like are here participating shows that you have some interest. And if really you can take one thing away from this, who knows the ripples that it can do for helping change kind of how you think about things, or you might share with someone else. Just hopefully there's an idea in here that resonates with you or you want to bring back to your team. So that's really all I've got. The last on the right-hand side is truly, the longer I've done this, the more I really believe in it, is that we work at this, and then we play. It's, if you want to stay at this successfully for a long time, it has to be more than just the slide where it's, distraction and fun and whatnot, unless, I think it's going to lead you down a pathway of darkness eventually, if you don't spend some time putting the elbow grease into caring about being out in complex environments.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Trip. That was amazing. Oh, further reading. Screenshot that.
There's two slides here. These are just kind of the books. We talked about them they're all interesting. The Field Guide to Human Error is only if you're totally a geek about how people deal with errors, but the other ones are all really fairly classic-y books that are pretty enjoyable to read. Flow, Teresa's talked about, and that's Sent Me High's kind of like I think swan song as he moved out of academia about being in a flow state, which we didn't really discuss, but arguably is probably what pulls most of us and keeps most of us in paddling. So I have one more slide, if however long I need to leave this up for people to take a picture, but and it's more just articles and a few links to some more cryptic stuff.
And there was a question in the chat about whether or not the presentation was recorded, and it was recorded and it will be shared. So if you want to go back and reference anything that was presented tonight, you'll have that opportunity.
Which link should we check for river obstruction reporting tool?
The link that Justin shared in the chat.
The board, is that the board?
Boat Oregon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Board. Okay, I got the screenshots.
You all, you have stuck with us for what turned into, I think, an hour and a half, maybe an hour and 45-minute presentation. We do this every time, Teresa.
I know.
I advertise it as like 75 minutes, and then
It goes as long as it goes, just like the river.
That's true. And then every time, you know, at this point, 60 of you, you know, for most of the presentation, 100 of you were hanging in and listening to Tripp's every word. So we absolutely appreciate the enthusiasm for these talks. Tripp, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. It sounds like you're passionate enough about the subject matter that if we did have one or two people with a question, I'm guessing you would stick around. But for those that you don't need to sign off or want to go check the football score, please, of course, feel free to do that. And again, we will have the presentation posted on the YouTube channel probably pretty soon here. And you're getting lots of thank yous in the chat. I don't know if you're paying attention.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Oh, actually, I'm not a very good chatter, but let's see.
That's okay.
Yeah, you're getting. Yeah.
If there are any specific questions, I am certainly happy to address or clarify anything.
Yeah.
You got a mahalo. Yep. That really smoothed out. Bye. It's good to see you, Horst.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think they're done asking questions. They would be on it by now if they really wanted to.
I find that if you just talk them to death, then they know. Like,
Oh, well, I have to say I screenshotted more of your slides than I do most people's. Do you mind if I steal your slides?
I'm happy to share the presentation with folks.
Well, actually, if you can make a PDF for us to put up, that would be terrific.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I appreciated all the new photos you added.
Yeah.
Killer, really good.
Good night, everyone. See you at the next safety talk on leadership.
Leadership. It's going to be interesting.
Oh boy.
It's the human factor again.
It's true.
Who knows? Tripp might be there.
It's true.
I definitely have some notes from one of our discussions in my leadership brainstorm.
Leadership is yet another,
Yeah.
right? Like, okay, types of leadership, traps that leaders can fall into. What makes a great leader? These are kind of sort of the categories I'm lumping so far.
Right.
And then strategies and tools for leading.
Yeah. And, it always keeps going.